everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, uh, we are doing yet again more work on the wooden roller coaster. We also really start developing the western area of our park. But to start, we are doing work on the wooden coaster, so I'll talk about that. So I sort of found another way to uh, how do I word it? So in the last episode, I talked about the coaster track being a little too close to the queue line, and I found a way to get it a little bit further, and it just required a couple small adjustments. Um, but that way, we don't have to worry about people being able to reach from the train to the queue line or vice versa. Because as fun as high-fiving people is on Gemini at Cedar Point, um, it's a little different when one person's standing on a platform and the other's on the coaster. A little less safe that way. So we made that adjustment so we no longer have to worry about that, and things just work a little bit better. And following that, I basically stripped out the entire outside wall along the base of our little makeshift cave, and that's because I wanted to go through all the areas where we had to put in custom-esque supports and replace them with a better scenery piece. So initially I just used the 1/3 height slate wall, and that more or less worked fine. But I realized it would be a little better and a little more realistic, especially for a wooden coaster, to use the scaffolding piece from the what do you call it? You know, the the colored wall set. It's late and I've had a long day. If you couldn't tell, anyhow, that's what I went through and used, and I placed that in our little cave, and of course, underneath the station for the first tunnel after the first drop, I put them in there as well. And I left a little bit of the natural wood supports right along there where they sort of remained, but those eventually, when I put the walls in for the outside walls back in, those will eventually go away. So anyhow, and that is what it looks like I am about to do here. So pretty straightforward. Just some work to make things a little more realistic and a little better. Um, Obviously, you can put as much detail or thought into a build as you want in your own parks. And hopefully I've done a good job explaining why I put the level of detail into my parks that I do. But for what it's worth, I don't know where I was going with that thought. Again, long day, but I have to upload this tonight because it comes out tomorrow. So anyhow, um, yeah, basically I put the level of detail in that I want to because that's just the expectation I have for myself, and that's what I find to be the most enjoyable. But if you put less attention to detail in your parks, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Anyhow, moving on a tiny bit, you can see where I adjusted, and this is a few moments in the past, but I adjusted the profile of that little straight track section through there, just so I could adjust the ceiling height properly. And it looks like we're making yet another adjustment, and that's not even the first adjustment I'm going to make to that in this video. Eventually you'll see how I fix it later on, and that was actually the last thing I did before filming the POV, but I put that footage a little earlier while working on the coaster is still relevant. Um, Anyhow, I don't have a name for this roller coaster yet, so if you have any suggestions, leave it in the comments section below. I do have some things in mind in case no one suggests anything, um, which is probably what's going to happen, because that's what's happened for every other video. No, I'm not actually crying, don't worry. Anyhow, and here I'm just putting a little more scenery items along the first drop and along the track, and I'm just experimenting with some different things. Um, Mainly using those wooden entrances again. I don't want to overuse them though, so I may go up there in the next episode or at some point and just take some of those out. But anyhow, along here, I started trying to put some sort of covering over the lift hill, and unfortunately there is no roof piece that is quite the right height or yeah, quite the right height or quite the right slope, really, for these inclines. The one that works best if you want to do what you see me doing is that piece I was just using, the standard Western roof piece. But if you just make it a difference of 2/3 height instead of full height on each one, it works out a little better. But none of that was working quite the right way, so I decided instead just to have a building at the base of this lift hill instead, and this could sort of function as like maybe the motor building as well for the lift, or whatever. Anyhow, so I started to build something out, and you can see sort of the natural progression of that process. I started with just a 1x2 building, because I knew what roof piece I wanted to use, and that's the one straight above the lift hill. And then I decided I wanted to make it a little wider because I had space for it, and I realized I could make an actual fuller building out of this, and something that looks good inside and out. So that's what I ended up doing, and just putting in doorways on both sides of the tracks, just so that way maintenance personnel could get in on either side without having to cross the tracks, should it be any sort of issue, and putting some windows to get a little light in there and make it look good, again, inside and out, and just add a little more ambiance. And of course, to access that other side, there needs to be some way to do that. So right along here, we do a little bit of custom support work with those scaffolding pieces, and we started with a one wide path, but I eventually made it two wide, because of the, if you can see it, the little sliding doors on the other building right straight back. Um, that's just sort of the scenery building, um, right next to the right diagonal from the station, I should say. And of course, this wouldn't be super accessible from like a vehicular standpoint. However, some vehicles could get back there, but really, just I made that path too wide to justify that doorway being too wide. And then here I am underneath the station in that tunnel, adding in those scaffolding pieces. And that is all of that completed. So what are we doing next? That's me asking, not posing a hypothetical question, um, because this section of footage hasn't quite ended. Okay, moving on. Ah, yes. So along here, this is more of some tunnel work. This isn't a proper tunnel though that I'm building. This is sort of just a little roof piece. It's kind of a tunnel, but it's not completely enclosed. It's open on the sides. And again, this is just one of those things that is just along there for fun and to add a little bit of scenery, um, and just to make the ride a little bit more thrilling, I guess. Yeah, it serves no thematic purpose other than looking interesting, I guess. So I will let you guys decide what you think this structure could or could not be. Um, Anyhow, moving on from that, now we were working on the little inside of this big turnaround. So I had plenty of space, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I decided to build a little like Native American encampment. Um, and of course, the ride will go by so quickly. I don't even know if this would be really visible for guests, but I wanted to put something in here. Whether or not this will stay remains to be seen, because it's really, I mean, it's more or less, I feel like maybe, I don't want to say a waste of scenery pieces, but they aren't very well visible from the ride, and they certainly aren't very visible from the outside. So maybe we can do something similar elsewhere. Anyhow, I'm looking for a better spot for our windmill, and it was, or I guess it's a wind pump technically, and it was in this spot right to the right of our little photo booth, um, but I didn't like it there because it blocked the view of the drop. What little view people had of the first drop, and I figured that's something that should be, because it can be visible. I wanted to make sure it was visible from the perspective of the riders, or from the perspective of people by the entrance, just to sort of build up excitement for the ride, given that most of the ride is not really visible from the pathway. And here, as finally I'm revisiting this section once again and adjusting the banking a little bit, just to make it a little bit better. And because I had an off-axis turn already, I decided to get rid of the first off-axis airtime hill, and you can see me working on that right now. and I was trying to come up with a way to replace it. And what I eventually settled on, I realized messing with the banking and stuff, I had enough room for just a proper um, normal airtime. So that's what I put in there. And I put in a little tunnel because I finally had a straight section of track that wasn't really banked. I don't like to bank the cars in the tunnels if I can avoid it. Granted, I did it in our station flyby, but we're not going to talk about that. Um, but we had a nice straight track with tunnel, and I figured this was a perfect spot for. I already said tunnel. A straight section of track with no banking, I guess. That seemed appropriate for a tunnel, so I put that there. I just put a little bank side on the side. Um, I don't know. I feel like bank is the most appropriate word on these signs for a roller coaster because the track is banked along the curves. Anyhow, and then I just went through and placed some more signs around the place. I placed the sheriff sign on the station in a couple spots. So maybe the theme of this coaster can be like something to do with the sheriffs, or maybe like a cops and robbers kind of deal. I don't know. Um, we can certainly decide that as we go, or maybe in the next episode or something. Who knows? Anyhow, moving on, I ended up putting the mine drop ride in place, and I found a nice spot for that, and it looks good right up against those other buildings, and it's kind of tucked away, so it's not at the forefront, but it looks good from the pathway and next to the roller coaster. I think it's sort of a fitting spot, having all those different wood structures and stuff. And to fit with the mine drop ride, I placed uh, the little mine cart scenery item that's animated right next to it, and I thought that was a really good spot for it. So I'll probably delete the one in the other spot. Actually, I know I'm gonna delete the one in the other spot, and I'll explain that in a little bit, um, right? If I remember to explain it. Anyhow, and of course now I'm just putting some different shrubbery and cacti around the place just to fill out the theme. And of course, given that this is the Wild West, and we already have the medieval theme is sort of set in a forest, so this will be an opportunity to set this in more of a desert area and less of a wooded area. Um, if I can remember to do that. um, but now that I've said it, I think. Anyhow, I don't even know what I was doing and all that time I was rambling, and I don't know what I'm about to do because I'm just so caught up in. I don't know. It's late, as I've said. That's the theme for today's episode, I guess. That'll be our slogan. Um, but I'm just doing a bunch of random odds and ends, I guess, to fill out the area and to try and make it all the better. And yeah, I can't even come up with anything. Um, I'm just watching my little slider here on the screen slowly etch across until it gets to the next scene. We're almost there, so hopefully I'll have something more interesting to talk about. I guess the fencing there is a little interesting. Ah, yes. Okay, now we're getting started on the things I've recorded today, so I know what I'm gonna do. So I decided I wanted to have sort of like a Western Main Street, the kind of place that you would see like a shootout take place in an old Western film. And I've never done this properly in any sort of RCT3 Western area before, so I realized this is probably the best opportunity I have. Um, so I decided to build out like a sub midway, um, going along the length of this section, and I'm gonna build up buildings on either side and try to make them look good from the back side, since that will be visible from the main pathway of this park. Um, but to start with our first, and okay, this is the reason I'm gonna delete the other minecart scenery piece eventually, is because it'll be behind buildings when this is all done, and certainly won't look as good. So along here, I'm building a saloon, and I started building it right on ground level, and that would have been just fine. But I realized I wanted to put the porch piece, or the porch. I wanted to put a porch along the front, and that means I had to raise everything up by 1/3. So I went along with our adventure wall pieces, I believe, and got the 1/3 height base, and placed that all along the bottom, just to have something nice looking and sort of a nice foundation to the build. and give it more of a log cabin feel. And then I elevated the path by one to have it level with the porch, and I used a ramp going up to it, of course. And that's where we'll have the main floor of our saloon. Now, one thing you'll notice here between the first and second stories is the first layer windows are on the outside layer or outside edge of the wall, and the second story windows are on the inside edge. And the reason I did that is because it's the M. Brooks cheat is really finicky when it comes to placing wall pieces against elevated pathways. And if you've watched the series for a while now, you may remember that it's possible to get around that, but it's really finicky. And I decided to keep it simple for myself since I was going to have that porch roof there. It would obstruct that difference in that difference or that little offset, I guess. So I went with that just to go the simple route, and of course I placed the second story on the inside edge because I was using windows that are basically one-sided. I wanted to use those windows with the little pointed tops, and in order to do that, I had to have them on the inside edge. And of course, going along throughout the rest of this, I placed 1/3 height walls all along the edge of the inner platform or the flooring, I guess. Side note: I used the dirt pathway for that because it makes a nice wooden floor, and which is perfect, absolutely perfect for the inside of a saloon. So that's another advantage to having it 1/3 height elevated. And I placed the 1/3 height walls all along the edge just so that way we would have a good base point, I guess, for the rest of our walls that we put in there. And here I tried to use my booth seating scenery hack, whatever you want to call it, but it didn't work, unfortunately, with the elevated platforms. So I had to settle for just having seating along the border. You win some, you lose some, but at the end of the day, these builds are really about what's on the outside. So I'm not too concerned about how it looks on the inside, um, as long as it looks not bad, which it certainly won't in the end. And most builds won't, as long as you put a little bit of attention into your design or detail. One thing to note: this really is strictly a saloon. We have some stock rooms on either side, but there's no kitchen or prep area, so there probably wouldn't be any bar food being cooked or served in here, um, which is fine because it's not meant to be a restaurant. It's definitely meant to be a place for adult guests to come in and get a drink. Granted, there's no alcohol technically in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, um, but just part of the idea, I guess, is that you know it's a saloon more or less. It's kind of like what you might see at Cedar Point. They have windows as well. But anyhow, that's that, and we're moving on to a once more updated POV. So I will leave it here and let you enjoy the rest of this in peace. So have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.